Hey, Power.
What's up, man?
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah?
Why should you never go on a date with a villain?
I don't know. Why?
Because at the end of the date, the check comes, and they always look at you and say, "You're going to pay for this."
Oh, my God, man. Come on. Come on. Reset. What you been smoking, man?
Look, I'm ashamed of that one, but I had to do it. I couldn't resist.
Oh, that's gold.
Anyway,
That's gold.
Welcome to Power and Reset. As always, I'm Reset, and I am joined by the amazing and excellent Power.
Power!
How you doing today? You sound like you're excited.
Oh, man, I'm excited because we got a lot to talk about today.
We do. Last time, we talked about the heroes of video games.
We did.
The people or characters or things that came in and saved the day. And
Yes.
if we're going to talk about heroes, we
What do
got
we
to
have?
talk about villains.
Absolutely.
'Cause
Absolutely.
You don't have a hero without something to pit him up against, without a villain to truly drive up the stakes to make it so that you have to save the day.
Yes. Yes.
So we're going to dig into some amazing, some truly villainous, evil,
Absolutely.
dastardly villains.
And we know that anybody who's listening to us, they know what a good hero is now. I mean, we told
Yeah.
them, right?
That-
And they know what a good villain is. They have to because they're listening to us, and we're two villains.
That's right.
But we always have to preface it. What makes a good villain, right? There's different types, different shapes and forms of villains. There are villains who can give you an hour's speech as to why they're so powerful and evil, and there's others that don't say a word.
And somehow achieve that same that you just hate them.
Absolutely.
You just want to save the day, and you want to beat them, and you...
Absolutely. Now, let me ask you this. Is the villain the same as the antagonist?
That's a good question, because I would say, in terms of the way most video games are set up, the villain is the antagonist.
Yes.
But sometimes the situation that pits a protagonist and antagonist, the villain is external to that conflict.
Yes.
Is what I would say. So
Absolutely.
how would you define a villain then?
Man, a villain to me, Reset, is I know so the term I would use for a villain would be the person who's causing the major problem, chaos of the story, right? Like when I think of a villain, I think of you being able to pinpoint this is the individual, the group, the sect, the corp, whatever that I need to stop, I need to prevent from achieving their goal. Otherwise, chaos, whatever that may be, either you losing someone, the hero losing somebody important to themselves, or the world ending. Whatever it is, they have to stop this specific entity.
Yeah.
Personally, a villain to me is just the asshole preventing you from doing what you want, right?
Yep.
But
and there's good examples, like you said. Sometimes there's multiple antagonists.
Right.
There's a secondary or a tertiary, and
Exactly.
sometimes what comes to mind instantly is Final Fantasy VIII, where
Yes.
you've got this rivalry between the two main characters, and there's that antagonist protagonist vibe there, but really that's not the villain. The thing that's actually creating the evil actions and driving the plot forward is not that that protagonist antagonist relationship.
Yep. Not
So
at all.
there's nuance to it. There's
there's
a lot
so
of
much.
levels to it.
Yes. But without further ado, I think we need to dive in because I know
Dive
we got
right
a
in.
lot to say. We don't want to take up too much time. Let's just talk about our top 5 villains. I'm going to let you kick us off.
Yes, thank you. And
What you got for me, Reset?
look, I'm going to kick us off with a bit of a callback, and probably not the most villainous of villains.
Okay.
There's not a lot of depth here. There's not speeches, and this isn't going to be one of those that really gets into it. But the first villain I want to talk about, that was one of the first villains that I had to go up against all the time playing video games, was Dr. Robotnik, a.k.a. Eggman from the Sonic series. So, maybe not a genius mastermind, maybe, pretty simple motivation, wants to take over the world and create an empire. But to their credit,
yes,
at every turn, somehow they had time to create, to take over all the local animals and things and turn them into robots, create some kind of genius maniacal lair, and then create a robot unique every time that had multiple transformations of wacky ways to beat Sonic.
Absolutely.
He wasn't I'm gonna install some RPGs and just. He was no, I'm gonna have this ball spinning on a chain, and then when you knock that off, I'll turn into a flailing armed robot that stomps at you. So he was Sonic, let's make this a game.
Yeah,
let's have a little fight. Every time you try and beat me, I'll come up with something wacky and new. Even though you're ruining my plans,
right.
like, I'll do you a service here.
You got to give Eggman respect for multiple reasons, right? Number one, who would ever choose to go by the name Eggman or Dr. Robotnik? You know, come on, like, eggs crack. Like, nobody would think, like, that's a cool name.
Look, let's just say that during quarantine, he did not buy a treadmill.
Right,
that might have been part of it.
Right. And so you're saying he was a little egg-shaped, huh? And then, like, number two, like, yeah, you're right. He builds these ridiculous contraptions that are all contrived and make no freaking sense. Yep. You're trying to capture or defeat a creature that can run at the speed of light, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So why would you build like a chain or a spiked ball on a chain that swings left and right? Like, okay, he'll just run around it, or like, you know, there's so many ways to fight against his antagonist, which would be Sonic, but he never like builds anything that would go against Sonic's strengths. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, he always comes up with some kind of wacky, innovative, like he's just like messing around. He's like, man, you know what? This time I really think I want to try and take him out.
Right.
It's, you know, it's like when you've gotten so bored of something that you try and make it more creative for yourself.
Exactly.
Like, you know, got to do something
it's
new.
Like, oh man, if he stands underneath this thing, like it's gonna, like the ceiling's gonna collapse and crush him. But every 10 seconds, the ceiling's going to raise back up. So he'll have a chance to get through it, like, every 10 seconds. But, boy, if he makes a mistake, even though he's, like, the fastest living thing on this planet. Like,
but that's the thing, and that's why he's such a villain to me. Because, like, his villain moment, unlike some of the more specific ones I have to follow, is literally just the end of every level.
Yeah.
Because you know, like... And some of the, like, as you get further in any of those Sonic games, the levels get harder and harder, and your reward for getting through them and for, you know, jumping on all those platforms, dodging all these creatures, you know, flying through these spikes, is you get to this enemy, and it's always Dr. Eggman, you know, Dr. Robotnik, and some new contraption that you got to figure out, and there's always going to be, because you go at it for the first time, you're like, okay, what am I looking at here? It's like got lasers over here, and then there's that infamous moment you get hit, and you just watch Sonic make that pose, and you hear the ding 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 all of your rings, just like, and then you're like, now you got to dodge his moves, try and collect enough coins so the next hit doesn't kill you.
Yeah.
And then finally when you beat him, every time his robot explodes and he flies off in that stupid little like escape ship, and you're like, all right, I'll get you again.
He's so good at getting away. That's what you got to give him. You'll never capture him,
and
no matter
he's the
what.
Infamous for all the rings he took from you. He also took tons and tons of quarters.
Yeah. Well, look, every villain on my list, right?
Okay.
These guys are all messed up in the head, demented and evil. I actually narrowed my list down, and I don't think I have any villains on this list, maybe excluding one, that is funny. And so I just want to preface that with that. Prepare yourself for some darkness,
we're
right?
diving into
talking real dark
darkness
video game villains. And I'm going to try to keep it so they get progressively worse. But I'm going to start off with my boy Liquid Snake, a.k.a. Liquid Ocelot, right?
Somehow I knew Metal Gear Solid was going to come up.
Had to be on this list. Had to be. This is probably the goofiest villain on my list, right? You got this guy who basically looks like Guy Pearce without a shirt and long blonde hair. He's got an Australian accent, I believe it was. And he just, all he does, his greatest superpower is that he talks mad shit. Like, that's his greatest strength.
He is the original trash talker. We were all in those Gears of War lobbies trying to do it, but Liquid Snake was out here really throwing it down.
Literally, Liquid Snake could take over the world if he could just stop talking trash. Like, he'll take you, he'll capture you, wrap you up in a rope, and you're like, oh no, like I lost. And he's like, yes, you have. But now I'm going to yap your ear off for another 30 minutes while you, like, figure out how to get out of this, like, situation. Like, he is an idiot in that sense, but he's so cool. He is the primary villain of the Metal Gear Solid series. He basically is like the anti-Solid Snake, right? Like, he's got the same abilities, same genetics. He's just a super soldier, like, smartest combatant on the battlefield. Like, he just is top tier. He's like Captain America gone rogue or evil. And, like, his mission was just really cool. Like, he just was like, look, I'm going to, like, steal it was kind of a Die Hard thing. He's like, I'm going to steal these nukes, and I'm going to threaten these places. Like, unless you do this, like, you're getting nuked. He just was a really cool villain in that series. But the thing I have to give Liquid Snake, and why he's on this list, I'm going to give you reasons why each one of these guys is on this list, is because he had this bond with Solid Snake. So this is one of those villains where it's just the villain makes the hero makes the villain. They are tied. They are quite literally twin snakes. They are clones of each other. And they are brothers also in the same sense. And so his hatred and love for his brother is just unrivaled, right? He hates Solid Snake, but he also is infatuated and loves Solid Snake. He does not want anyone else to try to stop him except his brother, and that goes as far as killing him as well. He wants to battle him on the battlefield. If it's kill or be killed, let it be my brother Snake, and let us put our metal against each other and see what happens. And I always thought that was the coolest thing about him. And then the other thing that I loved about him was he transcends into the latter series by swapping bodies. That's how, like, resilient this guy is. But his true villainous moment comes in Metal Gear Solid 1/Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, which was the remake, where he decimates one of, like, the most iconic characters of the series by taking a giant robotic dinosaur and smushing him to dust and smears him against the floor. He quite literally mops the floor with his guts. And all the while, he's talking shit and laughing. He's laughing so hard that the mechanical dinosaur that he's in roars like the end of Jurassic Park and Victory. And it was just, if there was any moment, that's when you knew, I hate this guy, but I love him. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So Liquid Snake, Liquid Ocelot, God, great video game villain in my opinion.
There's kind of a cool depth there too, because as you said, they're kind of the twin snakes, and there's a complex. Like, both of them have, a very internalized, like, reaction. Absolutely. And, like, the things that they feel based on their origin.
Yes.
And it is manifested completely differently.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can see it in the hero, and the villain, and the two snakes, and what their purpose is, what their origin is, and, like, what their, the intent of their creation was, has defined who they become.
Right.
And that is the kind of connection between a protagonist and an antagonist, a hero and a villain.
And the last thing I would say that I found interesting about his character is that he was just so misguided. Like, this guy basically thinks something is happening to him the entire at least for the first game, and it is not. So, in our last episode, I don't want to recap too much, but we talked about how Snake was getting older, how his genes were degrading on him, etc. The entire time, Liquid Snake believes that will happen to him, and that his brother, Solid Snake, is the perfect genetic copy. And so he has this angst and this edge and this anger about him, like, you stole everything from me, like, you're the perfect copy, dummy. You're the perfect copy. And, like, he, like, basically never figures that out until it's too late. You know what I mean? So there's just something ironic about it all. Like, he's just such a failure, but the greatest failure. And he actually eventually does become somebody great, but not in the right ways. No. So Liquid Snake, Liquid Ocelot, however you want to call him, awesome villain.
I'm gonna take it in a different direction because you've got this darkness, and we're gonna dig deep into it. So I'm gonna save.
It's gonna get worse.
I think I'm gonna save my darker character to try and match where I think you're going. Okay. I don't know if I'll succeed, but for now, I'm gonna go in a different direction. All right. Where you've got these villains, right? And they're just, like, twisted. You know, their motivations and their beliefs and their ambitions are driven by such a crazy culmination of, their experiences and what they've come to think and what they believe. Mm-hmm. But then you have, like, the unstoppable carnal force. There's no intelligence really. Yeah. There's no logic, And to me, like, one of the greatest villains, and what I think is one of my favorite representations of this style of villain is the Flood from Halo. Because this is a villain that's come up in a lot of games. Just this like the parasite, this creature that just its only motivation is like survive, multiply, but just purely because that is what it wants to do and it's so good at it. Right. It's a threat to everything. Yes. And this has come up, in so many video games and even in shows. Like, to me, when I was a kid watching Star Trek, the Borg was one of the coolest like villains to me because their motivation was so alien. There was no like I want to rule something or like it was literally just I want to take over everything, multiply, and just like expand.
Quite literally, no humanity in that.
No humanity, and that's what made it so terrifying. Is there's no diplomacy possible. There's no can we reason with it. It was purely a like survive or die type of thing.
Yes.
And to me, Halo 1 will always be where the Flood were the scariest. And they kind of take a backseat in some of the later games, and they're trying to come up with new enemies for you to fight. But there was always that moment in the first game, and it almost like this is where Halo almost moved into like the horror the suspense genre. Because there's this moment where you've landed on this mysterious ring. And the first part of the game is really just like fighting the Covenant. So you're fighting this alien race. You're really driving around. You're trying to rescue other Marines, like survivors from your ship, the Autumn, the Pillar of Autumn, or whatever it was called.
Yeah, I think the Pillar. Yep.
You're doing that. You're fighting these Covenant. And you're like, okay, I can get this. Like us versus the aliens. Pretty simple survival. And then you come across this part, and you need to go like rescue the captain. And so you go into this underground place. And it's all dark too, so you've got your flashlight on. You kind of like you can't really see, and like you hear this comm chatter, but then it goes silent. And by the time you get down there, there's just these dead Marines, and so like you and Cortana, and you're all like, "What happened here? What's going on?" And it's like it's dark, lights are flickering. There's like these dead people. You're just like, "Oh my god!" And then you go and try and open this door. And these tiny little like creatures on these skittery legs, these creepy like red, phalange looking things just pop out and start coming at you. Everyone's freaking out. You're shooting at them. Yeah. But like you kind of kill them easily, and you're like, oh, all right, like that wasn't so bad. And then you go deeper. These creatures just start to come at you, and you start to realize, oh God, like this is nonstop. The people who I'm trying to save are going to get turned against me. Yeah. Even everyone's fair game. These things are just not. They're going to take over everything, and they're going to come at you with everything. And the worst part about it was as you got into it, and they started to take over the Covenant and the humans. Yes. There'd be creatures, and you'd kill them, and you'd be like, all right, I'm good. Let me turn around, and they'd get back up and come at you again, just nonstop. But to me, what really sold them as a villain. Is like as you get deeper, eventually you finally find a way to locate where Captain Keyes is. Okay. From the Autumn, and you need to save him because his I think his implants are the key to getting the ship going and getting off of the Halo.
I see.
And so you get in there, and he has succumbed to the Flood. So finally, and it's this whole mission. You free these Marines. You get in there, and you finally get to his cell, and he has been taken over, and you are forced to kill this Flood creature that he has become. And that was the moment that really like I was like, oh, these guys suck. But like that moment where I was like, oh man, like it really is like nothing is safe. Like these things are just going to keep coming. That was what really sold me, is this, man, this thing needs to stop.
There were parts in the Halo series where you would just see hundreds and thousands of these things crawl. It was like World War Z, like that movie where the zombies were just crawling on top of each other because they just did not care. You're right. It was like I don't know if they were a hive mind or what. I can't recall, but they just would. Man, they would just bum rush you.
Just this and it'd primal.
Like up to that point, you're Master Chief. You're this cool one-man army type of thing. It's like, what am I supposed to do against this? Yeah. Like there's no talking, there's no shooting, there's just running and surviving.
Yep, you are fighting a new kind of army.
Absolutely.
And the coolest thing, and this is a huge spoiler for Halo, but come on, if you haven't played Halo at this point, but the coolest thing about it is you as you learn about the Flood, you start working with this little, I think it was called Guilty Spark 343 or something. The architect. I forget what it was called at the time, but you work with this little, this little AI robot, that's there on the Halo, and he's like, look, we got to activate the Halo to destroy them, and you're on board. You're like, yeah, these things suck. Like the captain's dead. Like we need to wipe them out, and you're helping him. So you're following along. And you're like, all right, get this here, get this activation key, do this, and then as you're nearing the end, you find out what Halo actually does. And it turns out that even these super powerful Forerunner race, the only solution they could figure out to stop the Flood was to create these Halos. And when you turn them on, their solution to let's stop the Flood is just to wipe out any life that the Flood could take over. So basically, if you activate Halo, it's just gonna, it's purge.
Everyone. Purge.
It's just gonna wipe out life in the galaxy.
Incredible twist.
And so and that sold that even a race so powerful they could build these giant rings in space. Even they were so afraid of this thing. They're like, the best solution is just kill everything.
Just restart. Yep. Everybody die. Leave the plants and planets. But
it's the best we can do.
Yeah, they were a serious threat to that series. I would argue they were definitely the best villain of the Halo series. So for the most part, the people on my list are like individuals. But I guess technically this creature is also an individual. But this character that I'm about to bring up is kind of akin to the Flood for me.
Ooh, all right.
Different in a few different ways, though, and definitely not quite as chaotic. But I've got to bring up Lavos.
Yeah.
Lavos from the Chrono Trigger series back on PlayStation 1 or Super Nintendo, if you played it way back in the day. This entity, this alien creature, basically, at some point throughout the timeline of the Earth, will decimate the entire planet. And it does it like instantaneously. Like, imagine a giant meteorite lands on Earth, right? And on its back are these like strange pockets. Like, they look like mini volcanoes. And at some point they all erupt and they just shoot out these like destructive exploding weapons. Like, they look like rocks, but they just fly everywhere. Boom, boom, boom. Wherever they land, just massive explosions, mass devastation. That's what this creature is capable of. And the size of the creature, I want to say, was like the size of a building. Like, it's huge. It's like Godzilla. That's really what it's like. It's like Godzilla lands and just energy just shoots out of it and just starts destroying everything. What made this thing so crazy, though, was in Chrono Trigger, the whole concept is like you and your band of like JRPG heroes have to travel all throughout time and figure out how to stop this thing. So like, as you do, you learn about this thing. So that you're the only thought you had at the start of the game is like, okay, eventually, like when you finally learn about this creature, it's like eventually this guy's going to show up. And like, you basically learn about this because you travel to the future accidentally, I believe it was. When you arrive, everything is destroyed. And you're like, wait, what the hell is going on? Like, this is our future. What's happening? You find some like starving survivors, and they're all dying out as well. These other humans, and they're like, yeah, it was Lavos. Lavos showed up one day during this date and just like killed everything, destroyed the entire world, all of our society. And at this point, this is the future. So you had all this futuristic tech. It still wasn't enough. And so they're like, yeah, so he did this and he showed up, killed us all. So then you travel back to like the prehistoric age, and you actually see when Lavos lands on Earth. And you figure out it is an alien species that just like showed up, but landed there and was there the entire time. So during your own timeline, Lavos is there just chilling, just waiting, hibernating. And if you dig into the lore, you even figure out that Lavos like is advancing the species, because like the goal is basically to like, similar to the Flood, it's basically like take over whatever survives and then send them out. And like let them take over other worlds, almost like spawn children of Lavos, send them out into the galaxy and just have them like just
propagate.
Yeah, literally. And so, so you go to the past, you find Lavos there, and from that point you're like, shit, how do we stop this freaking creature? Like, this thing's massive, it's powerful. The main characters you have are the main hero's like a Goku looking dude who he looks more like Gohan from Dragon Ball Z, and he uses a katana. You got a talking frog, like a guy who got turned into a frog, and he's using like Excalibur, but in Japan it's Masamune, or Masamune, and so it's like the great sword or whatever. And then you've got like this great scientist, a princess, like you've got all these ragtag people, but you're just like a group. It's like, how do we stop
a band of heroes against an alien race,
exactly,
the size of a building,
exactly, and so. So you're trying to figure all this stuff out. You're traveling to all these other times. But the moment that really struck me was at some point in the game, Lavos attacks. And you're in a future timeline. I believe you're in a future timeline, or an alternate timeline. I can't remember. But you're basically trying to prevent him from killing everyone. And so your main character, who is named Chrono, sacrifices himself to stop him, to basically buy time. And he succeeds, but in doing so, he just straight up gets killed. And so, like, the game doesn't hold your hand either. This is some straight up, like, he's dead, the game goes on, and you can continue the game and beat it one way or the other without him. Because the game, Chrono Trigger, has multiple endings. So, to me, that moment, I had never experienced a moment where the villain just straight up wins. Like, it kills him. And if you want to get Chrono back, you have to go through so much stuff. You have to do so many, I would almost say they're side quests, because, again, this is all up to you. It's all optional stuff. But you have to go find these items, this egg, climb this optional dungeon, put the egg in a certain, like, all this stuff to get Chrono back. And, like, if you do, you get access to, like, the greatest ending. You know what I mean? But it just was so shocking. And, like, his death, like, the way he dies, basically, is like he gets his soul, like, just yanked out of his body. So it's one of those really bogus deaths where it's not a heroic, like, he's using some blast, like, go. No, he just, whoop, his soul gets yanked, body falls over, face first, he's out of there. And, like, this is a character you've been playing as him for 15 to 20 hours. You're like, wait, what? Gone. So, like, Lavos, Destroyer of Worlds, just, he's an incredible villain. Also, similar to, like, a Dragon Ball Z villain, this guy or creature, alien, has multiple forms as well. So that ginormous Godzilla body thing that you see also is just the first form. And he begins to transform similar to Frieza or somebody from another anime or something. He just, by the end, he becomes more humanoid, but he's also incredibly powerful in that state. And they've got to battle him in that way. So he's also one of those villains that just, like, no matter how many times you beat him, he keeps changing and getting stronger. But just an awesome video game villain for sure. Mindless destroyer. Like, he never speaks, but obviously he's intelligent. Or it's intelligent. I keep saying he. I don't even know. Lavos might not even have a gender. But it is just an alien species that will wreck a planet in minutes if it chooses to.
I just love, like, between the Flood, things like that. I mean, I think that is one of those great villain archetypes, which is really just, I mean, from the get-go, it is just something alien. Like, this idea that, like, what you're up against, it's like, its power, its motivations, you know,
you can't comprehend.
They're non-human, and yet in the way, it's, like, almost like pure humanity. Because, like, you know, like, you go back, at our roots, like, humanity's whole goal was, like, propagate, like, create more, survive, conquer, and we've done that. Like, look, you know, we are the rulers of our planet. We have propagated and conquered the world to some extent, you know. I mean, whatever. But,
right.
but like, you know, so it's weird because it's like you have these villains that, you know, they manifest in these, so, like, their motivation is, like, beyond these, like, modern intellectual, like, needs.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's kind of this subtle callback that's like, but it's primal. It's like, like, for these species, the core imperative is all that matters.
Yeah.
They don't need to make cars and TVs and the internet and, you know, talk about philosophy and write poetry. They're just like, nope, let's pop out more and keep on going.
It's funny because for these villains, specifically these two we brought up, the end game is not even an end game for them because there is no end game. It's just like, this is what I do. Like, think about it. If Lavos or the Flood succeeds, let's just say hypothetically they win. Like, there's nothing left. It's just like, all right, well, the Flood just took over the entire galaxy, the entire universe. There's nothing else to take, so now we just exist. Same with Lavos. It's like, if I send all this stuff out and I control these planets or whatever, that's it. Then I'm done. Like that's just my function. Like, and it's those type of archetypes are just so freaking interesting and so deadly and scary because there's just, like, there's nothing left. Like, you know what I mean? It's almost like that's not even interesting, but it is because of the fact that it's so primal.
And I love those villains, but there comes a point where you do need a break. You know,
for sure.
You can fight these amazing, super powerful, primally motivated, like, you know, beings, but then there comes a time where you're like, I want something more nuanced. You know, I want a villain whose motivations are a little more intellectual and are something I can understand.
Right.
And that brings me to my next villain, which I think is a good combination. I think their goal was destruction on, an unprecedented scale, but their motivations were so much more subtle and personal.
Okay.
So like the flood and like things like that doesn't come close. And this is Emmett Selk from Final Fantasy XIV.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I know that you have not finished this yet.
Not yet.
And you have not gotten to some of the amazing moments that make this one of my favorite villains. So I promise you I will do my best not to spoil this.
I'm close.
Yep. But, and we will revisit it so that we can talk together, and I'll see if you appreciate it as much as I do. But I'll keep it more broad.
Okay.
I'm not gonna spoil the ending, but I'll just say so. Because I know you've gotten this far at the very least. So this is Final Fantasy XIV.
Right.
The ongoing, MMORPG that is super huge right now to the point where the servers are overloaded and WoW players are migrating over and everyone, like the director's apologizing for not having enough, servers.
Digital copies and servers
Who would have ever expected this to be such a boom? But we're at this point where Final Fantasy XIV has been out for like 8+ years now. Realm Reborn.
Right.
And over this time, from the beginning, there was this like evil group called the Askians, and I may be butchering that pronunciation. That's
I think you're right.
That's how I've always known
Askians?
it. It's either like Ashians or Askians, one of those.
Right.
But so he is one of these Askians, and
one of the OG ones
throughout the game. They're kind of that like background evil. Like, this is an MMO, so it's going to go through all kinds of like, sub-antagonists and like different motivations. But always in the background, always manipulating events are these like mysterious, shadowy Askians. And like shadowy to the point, I mean, they wear these black robes with the hoods up. They look like, your archetypal evil mages.
Some KKK looking.
These guys like up there. They even got their little circle of like, we're gonna destroy humanity.
This is what we're gonna do today.
Okay, I see what you're. and these, but they're kind of boring from the get go. They're a bit like that kind of annoying shadowy villain that's always like behind everything is like, it's like the end of this Scooby-Doo episode where they're like, who's behind it all, and they like pull the head off and it's like, oh, it's some old white guy, like,
here we go again.
It's kind of a little bit like, it's almost like a little like like who are they? And and for me, like, I love Final Fantasy XIV, and playing through it was always kind of like they were annoying. Like they were always like, all right, they were behind everything, but they had these mysterious shadowy motivations and like they were so evil. And then the most recent expansion to date, Shadowbringers, came out for Final Fantasy XIV.
Oh, yes.
Now, I mean, to explain this, there's so much lore. I don't want to get trapped in trying to explain why this is so epic. So I got to try and contain myself and suffice it to say, like, you don't need the whole story, but basically this epic thing happens where the heroes of Final Fantasy XIV teleport to another world. And this world is being consumed by the power of like light. Like there's elements. There's like light, darkness, wind, fire. The kind of classical elements.
Of course.
Well, this world is just being consumed by like light to the point where it is eternally day. It's like if you're visiting Alaska during that time of year, where it's just like light out 24 hours a day. It's eternally day. This like endless void of just like light power is just consuming everything,
swallowing the whole continent,
barren like a desert, and there's just this small section left, and you're coming in to save the day, and you're like, we need to stop this world from being consumed. If you want to find out the details, go play Final Fantasy XIV. But basically, you get there, and instantly you're going around, you're trying to, and this dude pops up. Emmett Selk, and he's one of these Askians, but he's in this human form. He's got this goofy like haircut that's like half black, half white, and he's always just sauntering around so cocky, and he's just like, oh, you're gonna try and stop my plans, like, ha ha ha, and he's literally following you. Like you'll be going to try and save the day, and they'll just show up and be like, you're doing pretty good so far. And it's like at first you're like, what is this idiot? Like he's just this stupid, like he's coming up and he's like, ha ha ha, like not gonna stop me. And then as you get to the end game, he starts to reveal his motivations. In part, he just starts to tell you because you find out he's this immortal being. He's super old, and he's from this essentially this sort of lost race of like the original people. Basically, Final Fantasy takes place in this world where it's been, sundered into these different pieces. And you find out that the Askians represent the people that were the originals before that happened. And he is one of them. And he starts to basically convey why he's doing what he's doing. Right. And some of it he does personally and some of it he does incidentally. But on this journey, you start to realize what his motivations are. And at every step, they become more and more, I guess, human, like more and more relatable. You kind of like, man, like, I get it. Like, in his position, would I maybe not do the same thing?
Right.
And it goes from this sort of like completely removed, weird, mysterious force to all of a sudden, through a series of these amazing reveals, you realize not only what his agenda is and why he does what he does, but what your relation to it is. And to me, like that is that moment where some villains, they're villainous because they're just so twisted and their motivation is so like evil.
Yes.
And it's cool finding out why. But for some villains, they're like their motivation is almost so relatable that you're like, man, like, I mean, I need to stop you because if you succeed, we all lose.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't blame you.
Yeah.
And that is something that, I've seen in a lot of JRPGs, but I've never seen in Final Fantasy, is that moment where I was like, I'll fight you because I want to accomplish what I want to accomplish, but I don't blame you.
Yeah.
Because what you are trying to do, I get it.
Right.
And so for me, like, his villain moment is actually the moment where he reveals what it is that he's trying to do and why he's trying to do it. And in a way, why he's kind of letting you try and stop him. And so his villain moment isn't really like the moment where he hatches his evil plan or where he does something evil. It's the moment where he reveals that like he's not as evil as you think.
Right.
But nevertheless, like, you're going to come to blows.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got to get back to it, man. I got to finish that series.
And then we'll revisit this and we'll talk about, because maybe you'll have a different reaction, and that's what I'm excited for. Maybe you'll be like, this was stupid.
I already found his character interesting. As far as I've gotten in the game, I'm like, what's up with this guy? Like, you're right. I know a little bit about some of that stuff, but I still don't know what his in game is, like what his like in game purpose is, like. So I'm stoked. You definitely just pumped me up on that villain.
That's good. And then so later tonight we'll hop in.
Yeah. So this is great because my next villain is also a Final Fantasy villain.
Oh yeah.
One that I'm sure you'd never heard of. Sephiroth.
What?
Yeah.
Is that from like 1 or 2 or 1?
Major shocker. I gotta put Sephiroth on this list.
I'm glad you brought this up.
I gotta bring him up. I think people would set me ablaze if I didn't. One of the best JRPG villains, in my opinion. Look, full disclosure, I'm not even a huge fan of Final Fantasy VII. Like, I thought Final Fantasy 8, 9, 10, probably 15, like all of these, I probably enjoyed more than Final Fantasy VII, believe it or not. But I had to put Sephiroth on this list because of a few reasons. Starting with the fact that he just looks so freaking cool. He might be the coolest looking villain in any JRPG, I would say, and I'm putting emphasis on JRPG because he is certainly a JRPG character. But long silver hair, real pretty face,
a katana that's like that's 30 feet long.
Literally, a katana that's 30 feet long. Like, he's just ridiculous. But his powers, his abilities, everything that he can do, the way he carries himself, is just so cool, so villainous. He's always calm, even when he's getting like beaten by the heroes or whatever's going on, he's always calm. There's only one instance that I ever saw him kind of lose his composure. And actually, that's his villain moment for me.
Yes.
So Sephiroth, right, is this amazing, heroic soldier. Quite literally, his core is called Soldier. And the main hero of Final Fantasy VII is also part of Soldier. These quote-unquote soldiers are all basically super serumed up like fighters. Sephiroth unknowingly being like the top brass, like being the most souped up version, and he has no idea why. So the things he can do, he can jump 100 feet up in the air. He can slash with his katana a skyscraper in half. He can shoot fireballs. He can summon. He can dang near moves so fast it looks like he's teleporting. Like, he has all these great abilities, and the other people in that group of soldier all mimic that to an extent, but they're just far inferior. And so the way you get into soldier is you get injected with something, you don't even know what, in the game. And it could potentially kill you, but if it doesn't, it gives you like these enhanced abilities. So Sephiroth is the leader of this awesome group, soldier, basically. They're running missions for this company called Shinra, which basically in this world, just like our real world, is run by corporations. And this corporation basically like sends these troops and these soldiers off to do missions and stuff. And he's just a heroic guy. He saves towns. He does all this cool stuff. But at one point, he ends up learning something about himself. And what he learns is, like, he basically is an experiment. And, like, he was basically a baby injected with this, like, alien species. Again, going back to the Flood and Lavos, this species, this creature, who I believe they termed Genova, landed on the Earth. And somehow they captured her, took some of her genetics, and injected them into him as an infant. But he had no idea. So as he grows up, he becomes this super awesome hero because he's got all this awesome power. And eventually, everything comes to light. And he flips out. So what we have here is like the fallen hero. It's Superman after he figures out, like, let's just say, like, the Kryptonians are a bunch of, like, mass murderers. You know what I mean? Like, he can't believe, like, wait, what is going on? Like, I'm just me. I'm not part of this. Like, so he basically loses his marbles. He contains himself in a house and does nothing but research for days. Weeks, I think it may have been on end. To the point where all the other characters are like, hey, what's going on? Sephiroth, what are you doing? And he's just, don't bother me, blah, blah. By the way, Sephiroth, before Final Fantasy, the events of Final Fantasy VII, was the coolest guy. Most people won't know this because most people have only played Final Fantasy VII, but if you branch outside of that main series game, he was the nicest guy. He was so cool, calm, clever, just kind of funny.
So
like,
true, like,
yeah,
hero
he was
almost.
like a Superman,
a
like, just like, hey guys, don't worry, we'll, you know, blah. And he's just, get out of here, don't bother me, don't, you know, blah. And he's researching all this stuff. And at one point, he finally figures out, like, I am basically the son of this alien creature. And his villainous moment to me is when he finally realizes this. He burns down the entire town of the main characters. Like, the main character's hometown, he just burns down, kills everyone there, and basically tries to free his alien mother, who's being held captive there in a facility. And it was just such an incredible, dark moment. Some of the primary characters of Final Fantasy VII are there, but this is actually before the events of Final Fantasy VII, so they're all younger. They're not as powerful. They're not as confident.
Seen in flashbacks a lot. Yep.
So you see certain characters that you love from that series losing loved ones, parents, mentors, all dying by this guy's basically his hand or the fallout of the events that he is causing. And it was just such a powerful reveal for that series that, like, it shaped his character for me. And the funniest thing is, after that, his character falls a little flat, admittedly. I think he becomes so obsessed with his goal, which is basically to call upon a meteor to come hit the Earth. I mean, the guy goes completely off the rails. But, like, up to that point, you understand, like, you're like, man, imagine being, like, told you're this great guy, like, you made it on your own bootstraps, you're married or whatever. Your only goal is to save the other people on this planet in whichever way. You're also working for an evil company, but you don't really care, don't understand that as much. And all of a sudden you figure out, I'm not even part of the species, like, I was planned, like, all this stuff. I am a tool, like... And for him to take all of that on and become the Sephiroth we know, I just thought that was such a cool fallen hero moment. And I would actually love if they made a game based on that, where you just play as him up to those moments. But Sephiroth's a beast. He and again, he's very similar to Liquid Snake. He's obsessed with the protagonist of the series, Cloud Strife. Sephiroth treats Cloud like a baby boy. Yep. He just toys with him, calls him a puppet. Also, he basically beats Cloud on a mental level to the extent where Cloud becomes, like, comatose. And, like, I think, again, that might even be an optional thing where you get him back. But, like, he is, like, in a wheelchair, brain dead, because Sephiroth just battles him so hard that, like, he can't fight back. So that, like, even those things about him, like a villain so smart and so evil and just so like tied to this, to the idea of just breaking down somebody's character, I just felt like was awesome, especially when he was such a good guy before that.
And I think that is one of the few games that, I mean, part of the game is legitimately you have to go through the mental journey of a main character who's been kind of broken down, and you literally are like kind of within the like weird world of their mind, and you have to actually like fight your way like through their mental battle to like come back to their senses.
Absolutely.
And like find the willpower to continue the fight. And I really can't, like, off the top of my head, I can't think of, like, many other games where, like, the mental battle is part of it. And the villain not only beats you in, like, a fight, but, like, beats you mentally to the point where you have to overcome that.
This villain rattles the main character so bad that he just doesn't know what he should be doing.
Yep.
He not only doesn't know what his, like, objective should be, he doesn't know who he is. Mm-hmm. It's funny because it's like he puts him through the same thing he went through. When he was found out, I'm made from whatever, these Genova cells, and I'm not even, and he loses his mind, he puts the main character through that in a different way by also revealing something to that character. And the character's like, oh, I'm not who I am. And it almost defeats him. So like they have this weird bond that connects them. And it's just so good. It's so rich. I want to just be clear, I'm talking about the original Final Fantasy VII, right? So they did that remake. The remake is completely different. Like, Sephiroth's intro, everything is very different. But the last thing I want to say about this character, again, just talking about the original, this is why I didn't want to make this as his villainous moment, because he doesn't really do anything crazy to the main party per se, or to the main protagonist. And there's of course the iconic moment that I think we all know about, but I'm not going to spoil here. But the moment also that, like, when I saw this, I was like, I'm in for a treat, right? Which is hard to do. There is a portion where in this game you need to cross a swamp, but to cross the swamp you have to run through like the muck and avoid this giant shadow that's like swimming through underneath the swamp. And you're like, what the hell is that? You can't do it. Like, it's almost impossible. The only way to do it is to, like, eventually go find, like, what they call a chocobo, which is like a horse, and you have to ride that horse across the swamp really, really fast, and don't let the shadow catch you, because if it does, you basically face off with this massive cobra snake. Yeah.
And
it's huge.
You can't defeat it unless you've broken the game.
If you broke the game,
unless you've, like, grinded out levels to a stupid point.
Then you could probably do it, but it's so hard. It's so powerful. That's the whole point. The game wants to steer you away from just trying to do that. Get the chocobo, cross it. But when you finally do get the chocobo and cross it, what do you find on the other end? At that very point when you reach the other side of the swamp, you see something. You reach these canyons, and on the wall you see something on the wall, and it's something massive, and it's pinned against the wall of the canyon. You're like, what the hell? And you look at it, and it's the giant snake. And if I recall correctly, it had also been, like, ripped in two. Like, it had been split from, like, head to tip in two, and it was just, like, hanging there. And Cloud I think it's Cloud, the main character, he looks, somebody says it, and they go, Sephiroth's been here.
Yep.
And you're just like, wait, so you're telling me my whole party had been running around trying to avoid this thing. This guy just showed up, ripped him
one out.
And like, also at that point you had not seen Sephiroth in person, so you're like, what kind of freak of nature am I dealing with here? So like, Sephiroth, just an awesome character.
That is one of those, kind of like you say, like, the remake is gonna be interesting because they're throwing Sephiroth in a lot earlier, and they're really changing a lot of stuff. So it's gonna be interesting to see, because such an iconic villain.
Yeah.
And one of the best parts about it is that the only experience you have of this villain is through flashbacks, through people talking about them, and you don't even meet them for such a long period into the game that when you finally do, it's this epic moment, and it's going to be interesting to see if they can achieve that same level of badassery and of villainy in the new one. But,
they failed. They already failed that part. Look, I love that remake. I love it to death, but they failed that. I mean, they show him way too early, in my opinion. That's a whole nother episode, right? But I do think they're doing some very awesome and interesting things with this character. Very excited for that remake. But
one thing you mentioned, I'm glad you said it, because it's a perfect pivot into my next villain. Is that, there's this sort of fall flat idea where it's like, this is one of the villains that has one of the most amazing, like, kind of origin stories and this build up. and the conflict with the main character is so interesting to the point that like the final motivation is a little bit like
fuzzy.
Like
yeah.
it's a
or
bit
lost.
like it's like okay, like I see this, and then he was mad about this, and this created this motivation, and then you're like, but why are you doing this now?
Right.
And there's a similar villain that's just so epic to me, but does have a bit of a fall flat moment, and this is we're talking Persona 4.
Oh.
The true villain of Persona 4. Oh man. So Persona 4 is an epic game, and it's epic because this is one of those games where the villain is not pronounced. In fact, almost the entirety of the game is actually trying to figure out who the villain is.
Right.
Because it's essentially a detective story. Basically, in Persona 4, you're a group of high school students that through a series of events awaken these crazy powers. And basically what happens is your power allows you to it all starts at you're these high schoolers and these deaths happen.
Right.
These crazy mysterious deaths. And as it's happening and you're just kind of messing around, you awaken these powers that allow you to enter inside like a TV. And inside the TV is this whole crazy like world where like people's like emotions and like, internal turmoil manifest into these crazy dungeons. And whenever the people get thrown in there, massive spoiler for Persona 4, like the people get thrown in there, if they're in there too long, they die. And so you start going as like the saviors, people are getting thrown in there and you dive in and you start to rescue them. And so you have to battle through these dungeons, you rescue these people from this other world, and that saves them.
Right.
And, in the process, the whole time you're kind of trying to figure out, what's going on here and, like, why is this happening? And this is an amazing game where throughout the whole process, you're doing this investigation. And, you're like, okay, like you're saving people, you're building up your party of friends, you're recruiting new people and like awakening them to these powers. And you're moving through, and the whole time you're kind of like, well, what's going on? Like someone's throwing these people into the TV. Like, who is it?
Right.
You're starting to investigate. And then you come to this crucial moment where you have this these series of choices. And there's kind of a villain that's thrown in your face, and it's like, oh, like this is the bad guy. And if you're careful, you're like, I don't know, it doesn't all add up. Like,
right.
Like, okay, I see this, but this doesn't explain this. And if you don't choose the right choices, that's it. Like, the game ends. Like, you're like, all right, this is the bad guy, done deal. But if you're kind of like, maybe this, I don't know if I trust this, it keeps going, and you find out that all along, the villain has been right in front of your face this whole time, and it's this goofy, clumsy, like klutzy, incapable, like detective on the police force of this town, who the whole time has just been like, like acting like an idiot.
Yes.
And then you finally find out that through all of this, he is actually the person who's been throwing these people into the TV, and it is such this amazing moment where it's like. You're just like, your mind is blown and this evil person is in front of you, and you find out like you kind of think you're special, like you've awakened to this power over the course of the game. You've brought in your friends and you've basically awakened their powers as well. And then you find out that this person, long before you, awakened their power. And it is this mind-blowing moment as you confront them. And you're like, okay, all along it's been this, like, you've been doing this battle. You've been causing this. And you confront them. Their motivation is just like, I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Like, the whole time, they're like, I had this power, and, like, I was so bored, and like this small town that I'm stuck in sucks, so I just started killing people by throwing them in these TVs.
Went to see what was gonna happen.
And it's this moment where you're like, where were we? Like, hold up, all along, like
the most bored guy.
It's just this weird transition. For a moment, you're like, holy shit, like this character who I wrote off the whole time is behind everything, and then you're like, why did you do it? And they're just like, I wanted to. But then the true villain moment happens.
Okay.
Which is after all this happens, you've had all these epic reveals, these kind of underwhelming turns.
Right.
And then you find out that the true villain all along is basically this like malevolent god.
Yes.
And you find out, because you've gone through this twist where you're like, wow, this person that I never expected was behind everything.
Right.
But then it turns out
another mask coming off.
The person you never expected to have never expected. One of the first characters you meet in the game is actually behind everything. They're the one that awakened your powers, that awakened the like antagonist powers. And they're behind everything, and they and they've got these otherworldly motivations to take over.
Yes,
and that is the true villain moment, where you realize that the stage you're playing on is not simply one of like humanity against humanity, like good against evil on this like basic level. It's like humanity against the gods, like against these like powers beyond imagining.
Yeah.
Like the villain of Persona 4 is really that puzzle. That like working your way towards the truth and kind of pushing forward and saying like what's behind it, like what is the answer here, and if that answer doesn't make sense, then it can't be right. What is actually going on?
Yes,
that is what makes the villain of that game to me, is that the villain is really just like, what are you willing to accept? Can you just sit there and be like, yeah, all right, I guess I'm okay with that, but is that satisfying? No, there's got to be something deeper.
Right. Persona 4 is probably the best in the series. That game had so many like, and now this moments which were incredible. The character you were talking about, oh man, such a good character, voiced by Johnny Young Bosch. I remember it, just great character. There's something fun about villains who really just don't care. Like if you do them right. If you do them poorly, they're probably the most boring characters that you will see in any type of art form. But like with that specific character, it was so interesting because he's just kind of like, well, I had this power, and but what made him interesting was all the things in that quote unquote persona that he showed you before, where you're like, oh, he's just this detective trying his best. He's kind of like helping you guys, and he's aloof, but he's very intelligent. Like you really felt for him up to that point, and then it turns out it's like, oh, that's all BS. Yep. I don't care. I really don't care. I just was bored, went to kill people. And that was such a cool thing because his character was awesome up to that point.
And that moment where it's like, do you really know people? Because your impression of people is your interactions with them, and you feel like you get a good idea. You're like, oh, like this is this person, this is their personality, this is, and for you to be deceived like that, that's sort of one of the most personal, most like depth, like where you're like, how did I not see this? How could I have just taken this at face value?
Exactly. Man, Persona 4, freaking amazing. The next character on my list, a little bit different.
Okay. Right? Yeah.
So, the next character that I have that I want to touch on, the character this one reminds me of is Majin Buu from Dragon Ball Z, if anybody knows about that. I've got to talk about Skull Kid from Majora's Mask. Or a.k.a. Majora's Mask, because in this game, the villain is this maniacal, little, bratty, snotty-nosed Skull Kid who basically is like imagine like a scarecrow built in the image of a child. Like that's kind of what they look like. Yeah. But he puts on this mask, and this mask is the scariest like looking thing. It's got these ginormous eyes, spikes all lining it. It's heart-shaped, but it's very sinister looking. It's got nasty dark colors. I think it's like red, blue, yellow, like so many colors circulating through it, but it just looks evil. Like, credit to the designers. You cannot make that mask look like a good,
it just felt like
mask.
You'd see that and you'd be like, "Oh,
yeah, like what is it's some voodoo, like whatever."
Yeah.
And so like this innocent boy puts this mask on, and just like in the movie The Mask, it just controls him, and it makes him into this evil, sinister creature, because that is what Majora is like a deity of like chaos, basically. And so, you know, in Majora's Mask, Zelda Majora's Mask, basically this creature starts this timer, and like it's like in the span of 3 days, and you know, in 3 days, this giant moon with an angry face on it. Like the moon itself looks evil and mad. It has a giant face. It's got eyes, nose, and teeth. The teeth are just it's like a clenched jaw, and it is coming down. And when it lands on this town, it will kill everyone in it, and just the entire town will be reduced to ash.
Wiped out. Game over.
All the while, this Skull Kid, Majora's Mask, is just playing around, ruining like the citizens, like killing like I guess torturing and changing the deities and like the temples that surround the town, like just doing all sorts of evil like shit to the residents, to the actual environment, everything. And so Link, the main character, is basically on this quest to stop him. But there's just no way that he can do it in 3 days. It's impossible. And so like he has to basically keep going back to the first day and figure out like new stuff, take the knowledge, go back to the first day, figure out something else, new stuff,
rewind over and over.
So to me, one of the coolest things about this character and this villain is he's forcing the protagonist to see the end of days over and over and over and over and over. And it's like Link is a very simple character. Like he doesn't talk, but there's two things I think were really messed up about that. One, the whole purpose of that game is to do optional quests and get to know the characters. And you have to do that, you have to work with them over the course of those 3 days. Some of these quests end with characters quite literally getting married and dying the day that moon crashes on them. And it's them holding hands as they watch the moon come and kill them. Mm-hmm. And two, you're a little boy. You're a young Link. You're not an adult. And he has to witness this before every time going back to that first day. And they just forget everything. And so it's like, oh, it was so dark. It was so evil. It was against his child. But the villain moment for me, honestly, is in the very beginning. Mm-hmm. Where basically, you know, when you first wander into this territory, the main town is called Clock Town. And there's like the Providence area all around it, which like encompasses mountains, forests, lakes, all that good stuff. Temples everywhere, whatever. And Link is coming from Hyrule, which, you know, he just saved the day over there. And, you know, little boy, whatever, he's probably like 13 something. He's riding his little pony, and he just so happens to run into Majora in this like foggy, dark, creepy forest. And Majora somehow knocks him off of his horse, steals his horse, and turns him into what's called a Deku. But the way he does it is like it looks painful. Like Link wakes up. He's got this, like, he's basically a woodland creature now. He's got, like, this wooden face with this giant gaping hole. He can't speak. His eyes are, like, beady, and they've got these, like, orange lights. That's all you can see. He looks kind of like, if you've ever played Final Fantasy IX, he looks like Vivi, or, like, he just looks so, just so messed up. And, like, that moment to me, I was like, I went from, like, playing as this character who could beat anyone, use all items, went through time, became this awesome hero of time, to like, I'm shrunken down into this wood creature who has no weapons, can shoot bubbles out of its mouth and spin, and this guy just did that to me like this.
Just such a punishment out of nowhere.
So like, and also at the very end of that game, when you actually see what Majora's form looks like, it's one of the most frightening things. Like it is the most frightening thing from that series, in my opinion. Like the creature itself, when it finally releases the Skull Kid and like goes off on its own, it is like that. It's like something out of Dead Space or something. It just looks frightening. And when it fights you, it's dancing, it's laughing. It's like an Evil Dead thing where like it's just taunting you the whole time, like doesn't really care. And that villain to me came out of nowhere for the Zelda franchise. So I always got to give respect to him. I said at the start he relates to Majin Buu because he's childish and he's got all this power and he's pure evil and he'll just kill anyone. But he's still doing it at his own pleasure. He's just laughing the whole time. It's like there's only 3 villains I can think of like that. Like Majin Buu, the Joker from Batman, and this character. Just
that kind of like that manifestation of pure chaos.
Just like, a maniac, like a complete maniac. Just like, and if he succeeded in that Clock Town, you can bet your butt he would have gone around the entire universe of Zelda, Hyrule, any other kingdom, and he would have just done the same thing there. So he was just like a force that you had to stop, and you saw it in the people. Just an awesome freaking character.
And it's such a good, because that idea of like chaos and like destruction is just such a terrifying thing, especially because I mean, look at us, you know, like we're a civilization, you know, we live based on like kind of rules and expectations and like things that you learn over the years of growing up that are sort of, this is how you do stuff. You know, and some of it is crap and some of it is like, but like absolutely. We're like, okay, like, you know, there's like a structure to it. And then you have these people that come in there like, fuck it all. Like, I'm just going to cause chaos and I'm just going to destroy, or I'm going to literally bring the moon down.
Quite literally.
And those villains that just come in that were just upset the status quo. It's such an amazing and such an intense and visceral experience.
And his design again was just so good. If you want to be spooked, just listen, look up on YouTube a soundbite of his laugh, and I guarantee you will pee your pants. Like the voice, it's like this demented kid. It was so messed up, and scary that it stuck with me. And again, the idea that this poor innocent boy is underneath this mask just being used as a puppet, like Pinocchio, to do all these awful things, was on top of Majora being evil. That just if I hurt this kid, I'm killing this boy. It was just there. It was like Exorcist. It was so.
It feels conflicting. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it's been a while actually since I've played it, but I'm pretty sure they do have some death with the Majora character. I think at some point you end up figuring out he was part of some race of, I think they were gods or something like that, and he was bullied. I can't remember. I just remember there's a part at the end that I think dives into Majora's character as well. I wish I could recall it, but there's just a lot there. There's a lot there, a lot more than other Zelda villains.
So I've got one more, and I feel like in some ways it's similar in the fact that it's kind of this weird removed threat that's always looming, but also very much its own element. And I'll try and be quick with this because I know we're running along here, but the final one on my list here is GLaDOS from Portal.
Bring her back.
And to me, the interesting thing about this, and this is something I read on a Mashable article, back in the day, back in 2017.
Yeah.
I know it's been written up in a couple of different places, but here's what fascinates me about GLaDOS, is the kind of core spirit of Portal. Everyone starts Portal talking about the gameplay, but everyone ends Portal talking about GLaDOS.
Sure.
And what's fascinating to me is that GLaDOS was not originally in the game. This was a late addition. So the creators of Portal had created this game, this awesome game where all you have is this portal gun, and you're going through these puzzles, you put up these portals, you solve these puzzles, you get to the next one, and they had built out a good portion of the game. They started play testing it, and as they play tested it, people were playing it, and the feedback they were getting was they were like, "This is great. When does the game start?" Or this is really cool. What happens next?
Right.
And they were freaking out because they were realizing that there was kind of this lack of stakes, or this lack of this sort of experience. So people were playing through, and they're like, okay, because the way Portal evolves, so much of it is learning the game mechanics and taking everything you've learned to the next level, and then okay, now I can do this. And as you solve these puzzles, you're learning this next step. But they were freaking out because people were getting through a vast chunk of these puzzles and being like, yeah, okay, I think I get it now. Now what?
Right.
And they were like, well, hold on. Do we have to make a whole nother section of the game? Or and so developers were like, okay, there's something missing here. And everyone's toying around with it. And eventually, the idea came back to, we need a villain. And to me, this is what kind of really encapsulates how powerful villains are and how central a villain is to a story. These villains, they are what drives the hero or drives the protagonist. And in Portal, an amazing game, there wasn't this drive. People were just kind of mindlessly going through these puzzles, and they were like, all right, whatever. And so they're like, all right, what can we do a villain? And limited as they were, they started coming up with this, and they came up with this idea. And so if you play Portal, GLaDOS starts out as a guide. So as you go into these original puzzles, GLaDOS is really just hey, do this, you need to do this. And so you do it, and then it's only as you start to progress that this sinister side starts to creep out, and you're like, wait a minute, I've just been kind of following instructions, but oh shit, should I be trusting this? And this voice, some weird things start to come out. And to me, the villain moment of Portal is there's this one puzzle. You get what's called the companion cube, and it's just this little box with this little heart on it, and it's crucial to solving these puzzles because you need it to pop it through this portal to hit a button to open a door. You figure it out. And so you do that, and you take this cube and you solve the puzzle, and you get out this door, and GLaDOS is like, now kill it. Destroy it. And this little iris opens up, and it's just this incinerator, and it's like, it won't let you go on. It literally, like, there's the elevator is like the end of every level, and it will not open the door. It's like, you need to destroy the cube. Kill the companion cube. Do it. And it's just like this moment where you're like, but no, like, I don't want to. Like, what if I don't want to? And it's just like, do it. Destroy it.
Yeah.
And you're forced to, and from that second it changes. No longer are you like, I'm gonna listen to what you say. You're like, fuck you, like, I'm coming for you.
Yeah.
And so after that moment, at every moment you're thinking, you're like, okay, like, I see what you're getting for, but I'm gonna try and circumvent you.
Right.
And that creates the villain, and that motivates you. You're like, I want to solve this puzzle because I want it. I'm coming. I want to get to you.
It was excellent.
And,
absolutely.
And
phenomenal.
it comes to this incredible end, you know, where you finally go head to head with GLaDOS, and to me that is what makes a villain, because literally the villain made the game.
Yeah, they go hand in hand. And credit to the voice actress who did that voice too, because Incredible. It was like, that voice sticks with you.
Ellen McClain, I think it was.
Oh, yep. I know we're running out of time, so I want to wrap this up. My last villain, right? Flowey.
Oh,
Flowey from Undertale. You know what
Undertale.
Flowey looks like? A sunflower. A smiley talking sunflower. This is my number one villain on my list. Frickin' Flowey. I call Flowey the game breaker. There's so much that can be said, right? So Undertale, this game where you're this human boy, it's like a fairy tale. You fall down a hole that's thousands of feet deep or whatever. The boy lands, he doesn't die, whatever. That's the fairy tale portion. And you're in this labyrinth. And in this labyrinth, you are mingling now with like monsters, but they're all sentient. They all can talk, blah, blah, blah. But one of your first interactions is with this flower. And this flower is like, well, welcome to the underground. Like, here we we're all happy and blah, blah, blah. And basically is the tutorial. And so during this tutorial at one point, the flower's telling you as the player, like, collect these love petals. And you're like, oh, basically Undertale's combat system is like, there's like a box, and then there's things that will cycle through this box, things that'll dart around. Sometimes the box will get narrowed in, so it'll be smaller, and you are like a dot in this box. And you have to dodge all the AoEs in this thing. It's almost like a bullet hell game contained in this box.
It's like a little mini game section. Yeah.
And so this flower's like, collect these petals, and once you do, you take damage. And that is the intro, and the flower starts laughing at you, and he's like, you're an idiot. You're going to die down here. You're pathetic. Like, there's no such thing as love. It's kill or be killed. Like, immediately, this freaking flower that's sticking out of the ground, like, hey, guys, howdy, it starts by saying. Like,
so happy,
just
so
introduces
cheerful.
you to this bogus freaking world. Or so you think. So, the reason why Flowey is so incredible, right? That's one of your first interactions. So from that point on, you're like, shoot, I've got to dodge, I got to battle. Well, midway through the game, you start to realize, like, oh, certain characters aren't evil. Certain characters actually want me to talk to them and spare them and all this stuff. So maybe you do that, and you realize, like, oh man, like, I've been killing innocent creatures, basically, because I was taught to fight back. Flowey's villainous moment for me comes, his big villain moment, when I personally played the game. I made it about, I'm going to say halfway through. And I'm used to JRPGs, so I had been grinding and training and stuff. And I noticed the music for the game on the overworld map started to change. It was getting slower, and I was like, this is weird. And I got to a town, and some of the characters in this town were like, I wonder where such and such is. And then you go to the bar. Oh, weird. The bar's so empty today. It's because I killed everyone in this town, basically. And credit to the developer, Toby Fox. If you get into these random battles enough, you will wipe out every single character NPC in this game world. And so I realized that I was like, oh my god, I wasn't trying to do that. I was just training. I was just doing that. So I restart the game, and that's when the villain moment hit me. Because as soon as I start the game, Flowey pops up and is like, I see what you're doing. you're deciding to restart because you just killed everyone. You're pathetic, blah, blah, blah. Like, even there, this is why I call him the game breaker. He knew the player was going to restart somehow, and he taunts you. He's like, go ahead, restart. I'll always know the truth. And just, like, completely treats your life. It's the most interesting, like, experimental thing I've ever had in a game. Because when the character said that to me as a player, he's not talking to the character I'm playing. He's talking to me. And I was like, oh, my God. Like, I feel like crap. He's right. Like, I can't escape what I did. And to me, what do they call that? Breaking the fourth wall was just so freaking awesome. And he does it multiple times in the game, depending on how you play it. When you start that game, you have to choose a name. And if you decide to take Flowey, you'll get a notification. I think it's either from him or from the game, and it'll say, no, that name is already taken. It'll tell you, like, no, absolutely not. And it's so interesting because without diving too deep and taking too much time, you end up figuring out a lot about this character, Flowey. He's incredibly important to the story. I mean, integral to the story. And what you end up figuring out is basically he kind of went through the same thing that your character is going through. Not you as the player, because you honestly are your own entity in this universe. But the person you're controlling kind of went through the same thing. And what you find out is, like, basically Flowey had the power to save as well, to save the game and to reload and to do all the things that we as players can do. So it made him into this villain that was just, like, devastating. I just loved that character. I loved how unpredictable that character was. The character would leave the game world just to slap me as an actual player, and I've never experienced something like that. So Undertale,
and
Flowey.
That is where that game came out is such a cult hit.
Yes.
Is because it took such an established genre, which even when it goes on a different railroad, it's still all on the same track. You know, we're talking parallel tracks here. There's just these conventions, these expectations you come to have. You're like, okay, what kind of villain is it going to be?
Right.
But then you had Undertale, which subverted you at every turn.
Absolutely.
And like for me, I had a totally different experience because I came into Undertale later where I'd already read too many articles and I kind of like, I knew that there were these sort of like tricks to it and I'd spoiled too much. And so when I came in, you know, I knew that like killing was a trick. And so my first like experience with Flowey was like, I came in and he's like, here, collect these love points. And I was like, I think I need to dodge this. I'm like, and so I start like, I'm just dodging. I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. And he gets mad. He's like, I told you to collect the love points. Yeah. What are you doing? And I'm like, I don't. And he reveals his like kind of dark side.
Yes.
In a different manner. And it's just, you know, and it's like one of those where it's like, I was like, I kind of knew it was coming, like, but at the same time, like, totally different experience for that.
Yes. I mean, just incredible game in so many ways. Flowey, though, to me, just always stuck out. And again, this is a talking sunflower or dandelion. I think he's a sunflower. But at the very end of the game, when you actually start to see him go through his real forms, and all the way to the point where you figure out who Flowey really is. And again, I don't want to. I know we're saying spoilers throughout the entire episode, but I'll leave some of this stuff just in case. Yeah. Just in case. But you figure out who he is, and it is jaw dropping.
All right, so we could talk about villains for days.
Absolutely.
And suffice to say, I think the story here is that you can't have a hero without a villain. You can't make a game with stakes and with drive and with something that like motivates the plot without a villain, without someone whose interests or whose aspirations, be it, you know, primal, be it intellectual, be it, you know, like this complicated combination, create a scenario with which a hero can step in and say, that's not the way I'm going to do this.
Yes. And to create a good villain, I mean, it's complex, man. There's no right way, no wrong way per se. There's a lot of villains we didn't get to talk about today. Honorable mentions, I just want to say Lon D, Ganondorf, Zeus from God of War, Seymour, Final Fantasy X, Roger Bacon from Shadow Hearts. The list goes on. Bowser. I mean, there's a ton of them, right? And they're all different. So villains, heroes, we'll have to probably come back to this eventually. Down the line, there's so many.
This is something we're gonna have to dive into again. I mean, even just getting into the details of like what makes a hero and a villain, what hero villain pairs are the best. I mean, sure. I think there's so much to this story that's left to be told. Yeah. Honorable mentions on my side include the Elusive Man, Sin from Final Fantasy X, Gandhi from the Civilization games. If you've played it, what? You know what I mean.
Yeah. But we gotta wrap it up, man. Reset. Tell me, what kind of rating we giving this out of 5 villains?
Look. I mean, just calling back to what you've said, I think I got to give it 5 out of 5 flower petals from Flowey.
Beautiful. I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 butchered NPCs because they get it the worst.
Those poor NPCs. Thank you so much, folks, for listening. As always, please write us at powerandresetpodcast@gmail.com with your thoughts on what your favorite villains are or what you thought we missed or anything that you want to hear on an upcoming episode. Please write us and let us know. As with always, power up, and if you don't like it, reset.
Stay frosty, guys.